Hello, I'm Oliver Sang, and we are here with Shrouded Stories to get stories from various people here at the conference. And with me is Massimo Paris, and wanted to ask, how has the shroud and what Jesus has went through as depicted on the shroud impacted your life?
Well, I've been giving presentations here in the United States since I moved to the United States. That I moved to the United States in 2001, at the end of 2001. And one thing that one question I always asked myself, in journalism it is said that the 5 points to write a good articles is to take care of the who, the what, the when, the where. But regarding the shroud, I try to focus my attention on the why. Why did Jesus leave us that testimony of his passion, death, and resurrection? And I see, when I look at the shroud, I contemplate the shroud, I see an inhumane suffering underwent out of an infinite love for us. But not just, it doesn't end there. I think that he underwent that inhumane suffering out of an infinite love, so that also we could try to conform us to him, to imitate him. Not necessarily being crucified,
Yeah.
scourged, crucified, crowned with thorns, but in order to what he said, love God with all your mind, your strength, and your heart, and love your neighbor like yourself, and also love one another as I have loved you. The invitation from the Shroud is an invitation to love, in imitation of Christ, to love God, to love our neighbor, and to love also creation. That is a part of the tridimensional cross that should not be forgotten. For example, I'm vegan, and one of the reasons why I'm vegan is to also not to make animals to suffer in order to provide food to me. So this is my. I've been suffering from severe treatment-resistant depression since I was 17. I'm 70, so I've been suffering for 53 years. Thanks to the grace of God, the idea of committing suicide never crossed my mind. Although I totally understand why people do it, because it's unfortunately depression is still a very poorly understood mental problem. Often the person who is depressed is considered a couch potato or a lazy person. When you wake up in the morning, you have not 1 milligram, not 1 ounce, 1 milligram of energy. You have no hope for anything. Sometimes you need a crane to get out of bed, without hope, without motivation. And there is another aspect that I've experienced a few times for an extended period of time, extended periods, that also I don't wish, is the anhedonia, when you cannot enjoy anything. When I say anything, I mean anything, nothing, zero. Again, I don't justify or don't recommend the suicide, but I sympathize, I have empathy for those who do it. I know that St. Paul, in the first letter to the Corinthians 10:13, says that you have not been overtaken by a temptation that is not common to men, which implies that God never allows anyone to be tested beyond his or her capacities. And God provides, when he places the cross on the shoulder of someone, he also provides the graces to carry the cross. But it's definitely not a pleasant experience, especially for so long, for my case, for 53 years. So about was around 2004, 2005. After my mother died, I got involved in. I and my wife Carol, we were both sued by two members of my family upon the issue of my mother's inheritance, and they filed two lawsuits against me and my wife, and that really plunged me to even further, deeper than the bottom of the Mariana Trench, almost to the center of the earth. And I reached a point where I almost thought that God hated me. It seemed absurd, but when in such a devastating state of mind, you almost lose rationality. And I almost thought that if not God hated me, but he just had put me here on earth just to suffer. And Carol, my wife, when I told her, or I expressed this, vented out this frustration, she said, Massimo, how can you give lectures about the Shroud and say that God hates you or couldn't care less about you? And every time she told me that, I would clench my teeth and she's right. And but then one day, I don't remember exactly what year, but could have been around 10 years ago, and in the foyer of a church, there was a kiosk where they sell books and some CDs about various religious teachings or subjects. There was this CD that I don't remember verbatim the exact title, but roughly the meaning. What is the meaning of suffering? So of course that title attracted me. I bought it. And these theologians was referring to the passage from the letter of St. Paul to the Colossians 1:24, where St. Paul says, I rejoice in my suffering for your sake, and in my flesh I complete what is lacking in the suffering of Christ for the sake of his body, that is the church. And the theologian was saying, well, St. Paul says what is lacking in the suffering of Christ. What does it mean? The sacrifice of Christ on the cross was incomplete? He said, no, absolutely not. The sacrifice of Christ was totally complete. And because it was totally complete, if when we suffer, any kind of suffering, from the lightest to the most atrocious, we unite wittingly and intentionally our suffering with the suffering of Christ, he can invest our suffering of redemptive power. So he didn't give any recommendation how to apply that teaching. But I said, well, I decided that, especially in the bad days of depression, I started initially. It took a lot of effort. It was not easy. I was resentful against God for all this suffering, but nothing comes easy at the beginning when you try to establish a habit. So I started uniting my suffering with the suffering of Christ. I offered it to him, so I united my suffering with the suffering of Christ, and I offered my suffering to God the Father. And I cannot pinpoint after how long, but practically little by little, imperceptibly, I didn't realize, but this idea that God hated me or had put me here just to suffer, little bit vanished. So it is as though it gave me a meaning for the depression is still there, yeah. But gave me more meaning for the depression. So to the point that sometimes I'm depressed and said, so when is this going to end? So well, I tell myself, Massimo, hold on. Maybe uniting yourself with the suffering of Christ, offering myself to God the Father. I can save one life or a few lives in Ukraine. I can save one life or a few lives in the Strip of Gaza. So,
you had also mentioned that you had tried different things in the past in order to address the depression, and you had tried everything.
Yes. Just to give an idea, I tried that pharmaceutical. I tried at least 15 different antidepressants, and none of them work. and I tried a huge amount of other things. I avoided very carefully to do stupid things like to get into alcohol, street drugs, antisocial behavior, who knows. But also, all this I'm strongly convinced with the help of the grace of God. By myself, I would not have been able to. I would not have had the strength to do it. So I reached a point where this could have been maybe 10 years ago. Maybe after I had listened to that, I had reached a point where I said, "Well, I'm so frustrated. I'm throwing in the towel." And my wife Carol said, "Massimo, you can't. you're not alone anymore." So I said, "Well, you're right." And at that point, I decided to. I was aware. I had already read enough scientific material about the benefits of meditation. I had already meditated twice in my past, so I decided to restart meditating, and which I did around April, May 2020, so 5 years ago, roughly. And at this point, I invested heavily on meditation. I said it's my last opportunity. Nothing works. So. And in a normal day, when I meditate 3 hours a day, and since the time when I started, I keep track of how many hours meditation I meditate. So far, I have accumulated more than 4,000 hours of meditation since I restarted meditating. I'm not saying that my depression has vanished; it's still there, but there are some subtle changes. I was prone to cry a lot before. I would wake up during the night crying. And I asked Carol, well, I see this. Do you agree? She agreed that, for example, I cry definitely much less during the night. I'm less irritable. I snap very easily. I'm less irritable, and another thing, I was convinced that I would bring this disease to the tomb with me, so I would not have been able to solve it before dying. And now, actually, I start to see maybe a very small light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Which is comforting.
Yeah. So, for other people that do have depression, what words would you say to them?
Well, I would say number one, never. I'm not a fan of magnets on the refrigerator, but I have some. They're all magnets that are inspirational magnets. And one of these magnets reports this statement of Winston Churchill, who was the Prime Minister of England during the Second World War, and that is never, never, never give up. He repeated 3 times. So I would tell these people who suffer from depression, are depressed, feel hopeless, have no energy, don't feel to have any meaning in life, and so on. I would say number one, never, never, never give up. And anyway, one thing that I strongly believe, besides the meditation, has hugely supported my fight against this monster. The depression is a monster. I am Carol, my wife. We are daily mass goers. We go to mass every day. We pray the rosary every day. We have always been try to be of service to the church. I was the extraordinary Eucharistic extraordinary Eucharistic minister. Those people who help the priest for the distribution of the Eucharist during Mass. I have been at this point for almost 20 years members of a group of 4 couples who twice a year in our parish offer what is called the Pre-Cana course. It's a course that engaged couples need to take before getting married. It is mandatory by the Catholic Church, and I never abandoned praying. I never abandoned to try to be service to I heard Bishop Barron once saying, "Do you know why he asked?" It was an. Do you know why angels fly? So because they don't take themselves too serious. Sometimes when we are depressed, we have the tendency to implode, to close upon ourselves. We reject contact with other people and start, I'm miserable, I'm worthless. We start with a very long processes of ruminations, negative self-talk that are lethal. So sometimes to try to force ourselves to still have contact, to do socialization, to never to give up on prayer, never to give up on sacraments. And so this is the recommendation I would give to the people like me have fight this monster. Never give up, never give up, never give up, and most of all, never give up on God. Never give up on prayer, never give up on the sacraments, and try to be of service to others. In serving others, maybe you forget a little bit, not all completely, but will distract you maybe a little bit from, oh, I'm miserable, I'm so unlucky, I'm so everything happens to me. You know, I'm very familiar with this kind of mental rumination that I don't think is helpful.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your heart with us and with a sensitive topic, and giving hope to others as well, and to let others know that this depression is not something that only they have, but others have as well, and there's hope.
If I may add something, we live in a very materialistic society, civilization, and we are kind of brainwashed since we are very young that the more we consume, the more we accumulate goods, the happier we should be. But actually, according to the World Health Organization, starting in 2023, depression has become the world leading cause of permanent disability. So my other recommendation to people that are depressed, try to reflect on the fact that we are promised happiness through consumption and accumulation of goods, but then we are all more and more depressed. Something doesn't click, something is wrong there. And I've reached the most. This is also. I look in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I look in the paragraphs that talk about happiness, and there are a couple of 17, 18, 17, 19 that say that. But at least 3 paragraphs will say 17, 19, and 17, 19 and say that happiness is the goal of life. Talking about the Beatitudes, God wants to share His Beatitude with us. But number one, we need to be available to let God share His Beatitude with us. And the other thing is it's fundamental to be understood that only God can give us happiness. As long as we search for happiness outside of us, outside of God, it's a recipe for disaster. If we search for happiness in money, search for happiness in notoriety, search for happiness in power, search for happiness in physical pleasure, either the throat or sexual pleasure, we'll never be really happy. Only God can give permanent, stable, steady happiness. So this is the other. So try to focus on that aspect. Try to pursue that search with that aspect in mind. Never give up, but keep focused on the centrality of Christ and on always having recourse to Him. Always try to find comfort in Him. All this other stuff is of no relevance.
Yes.
Seriously.
Yes. Well, thank you again. I think this was a very, very important topic, and I'm glad that we were able to capture your thoughts here.
Thank you for having invited me.